Chapter 1. The Golden Ball and the Forest Spring. Once upon a time, in a kingdom nestled between emerald hills and silver streams, there lived a young princess with hair as golden as sunshine and eyes as bright as morning skies. She was the youngest daughter of the king and queen, and the apple of her father's eye. While her elder sisters spent their days embroidering silks or studying courtly manners, the youngest princess loved to wander the palace gardens and venture into the woods beyond. One warm afternoon, the princess walked alone to her favorite place, a mossy clearing where a deep spring welled up from the earth like a mirror to the sky. In her hands she held her most prized possession, a golden ball, polished to a perfect sheen. She would toss it into the air, catch it again, and laugh as it sparkled in the sunlight. But fate often changes in a single heartbeat. The ball slipped through her fingers, bounced once on the grass, and rolled into the spring. With a splash, it vanished into the depths below. The princess cried out, falling to her knees, peering helplessly into the water. Her golden ball was gone. As her tears fell, she heard a voice, raspy, curious, and entirely unexpected. "Why do you cry so, little princess?" Tuttled. She looked around and saw a frog sitting on a rock at the edge of the spring. He was large for his kind, with emerald, green skin and eyes that seemed oddly intelligent. "My ball," she sobbed. "My golden ball has fallen into the spring, and I cannot reach it." The frog blinked slowly. "Perhaps I can fetch it for you," he croaked. "But what will you give me in return?" The princess was eager, desperate. Anything. "You want, dear frog? Jewels, silks, even the crown upon my head." But the frog shook his head. "I do not want riches. I want companionship. Promise to be my friend. Let me eat from your plate, drink from your cup, and sleep on your pillow." The princess hesitated. The thought of letting a frog near her silken sheets made her stomach churn. But she saw no other option. "Yes, yes, I promise." With that, the frog leapt into the spring, vanishing into the water with barely a ripple. Moments later he returned, the golden ball held triumphantly in his mouth. The princess squealed with joy, snatched the ball, and ran all the way back to the palace, forgetting entirely about the frog. Chapter 2. The Promise Remembered. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and candles were lit in the great hall, the royal family gathered for supper. The long oak table groaned beneath platters of roasted meats, honeyed fruits, and golden loaves. The princess laughed with her sisters and spun stories about her day, leaving out the part about the frog. But just as the servants brought out dessert, a strange sound echoed through the hall. Plip, plop, tiny wet footsteps on stone. The door creaked open. There at the threshold stood the frog. "Princess," he croaked, "you promised to be my friend." The king turned, astonished. "What is the meaning of this?" The princess paled, then reluctantly recounted her promise. "You must honor your word, daughter," the king said sternly. "A royal promise is sacred." With great reluctance, the princess allowed the frog to hop onto the table. He ate from her plate, drank from her cup, and when the meal was over, he followed her up the marble stairs to her chamber. "I will sleep on your pillow tonight," he said simply. The princess gasped in horror. That was not meant seriously. But the frog only looked at her with wide, glistening eyes. And so, the princess placed him gently on a cushion, far from her bed. She turned away and cried herself to sleep. Chapter 3. A Night of Restlessness. The candle in the princess's chamber burned low, casting dancing shadows on the embroidered curtains and polished floor. Outside, owls hooted, and wind rustled through the ivy-covered towers. Inside, the princess tossed and turned, sleep eluding her. She kept glancing toward the cushion where the frog lay. He made no noise, no movement, merely watched her with an unreadable expression. There was something solemn in his stillness, something that stirred unease in her heart. At last, just before dawn, the princess whispered, "Are you awake?" "Yes," came the soft croak. "I do not sleep easily, even in a palace." "Why do you want to be with me?" "You are a frog." "Because once I was not." The words were heavy, carrying more meaning than she could grasp in that moment. But before she could ask more, the first light of morning crept through the windows. Chapter 4. The second day. The frog remained with the princess all through the next day. At court he sat quietly at her feet, as she met with her tutors and courtiers. The servants eyed him warily, and the princess flushed with embarrassment whenever someone glanced at the slimy creature beside her. But the frog never spoke out of turn. He never disrupted or made a nuisance, and when she glanced at him secretly, she sometimes caught him looking at her with an expression that seemed human. That night, he again asked to sleep on her pillow. This time, with a sigh, she allowed it, and in the stillness of the early hours, she dreamed of a boy with soft eyes and tangled dark curls, trapped behind a wall of glass. Chapter 5. The Curse Revealed. On the third evening, while they dined alone in a small chamber away from the grand hall, the princess spoke at last. "Tell me the truth. Who are you?" The frog looked into her eyes. "A long time ago, I was a prince. A wicked witch cursed me for my pride and arrogance. Only an act of true companionship, freely given, could restore my form." The princess's heart trembled. She remembered her scorn, her reluctance, and her fear. Yet she also remembered the kindness he showed, the patience, and the strange gentleness in his gaze. "And if I do this, if I let you stay beside me, will the curse be broken?" "Only if you do so without fear or disgust. Only if you treat me as a true friend." She reached out slowly, touching the top of his head. The moment her fingers grazed his skin, a pulse of warmth shot through the room. The frog gasped. Light engulfed him, golden and radiant. The air shimmered, and before her stood a young man, tall and regal, with eyes the color of spring leaves. "You did it," he whispered. The princess stared, wonder blooming in her chest. Chapter 6. The Prince's Kingdom and the Journey Home. At dawn the next morning, as golden light poured through the tall windows of the palace, the newly restored prince stood before the princess, dressed in simple yet noble garments lent to him by the royal tailors. Word of his transformation had spread swiftly through the castle. Whispers buzzed in the corridors, of curses broken, of ancient magic, and of love that bloomed from an unlikely seed. The king summoned the young man to the royal hall, where he listened with great interest and a keen gaze as the prince recounted his tale. Years ago he had ruled a neighboring land to the north, a realm of lush forests and crystalline lakes. But his pride had angered an ancient forest witch, and she cursed him to live as a frog until he could earn the trust and affection of someone pure of heart. His court believed him dead, and his kingdom had fallen into the hands of distant cousins, whose motives were not always noble. "You must return," the king said, placing a firm hand on the prince's shoulder. "A throne awaits its rightful ruler, and if my daughter chooses to accompany you, she shall have my blessing." The princess remained quiet for a moment, her eyes meeting the prince's. So much had changed in such a short time, and yet she felt a strange sense of peace, of destiny unfolding. "I will go," she said softly. "If you will have me." The prince bowed low. "There is no one else I would want by my side." And so, preparations were made for their departure. The court celebrated with a grand feast, and the morning after, the princess and the prince rode out together on white and chestnut steeds, their cloaks fluttering in the wind. But their journey was far from simple. Chapter 7. The Forest of Shadows. The road north led them through the ancient Forest of Shadows, a place where the trees grew taller than towers and the sunlight barely touched the ground. The prince remembered this forest well. It was where he had first encountered the witch who cursed him. Their company consisted of a few loyal knights, 2 clever servants, and a single old hound who had once belonged to the prince's hunting party. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, the wind whispered warnings, and the paths twisted unexpectedly. On the 3rd night, as campfires flickered low and silence thickened, a soft melodic voice called from the trees. "Return to your pond, little frog." The prince stood quickly, his sword drawn, eyes scanning the darkness. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in gray moss and vines, a woman with silver eyes and a face that shimmered like moonlight reflected on water. It was the witch. "You dare return?" she said with a laugh like rustling leaves. "You, who were given mercy?" "Your curse has broken," the prince declared. "You have no hold on me now." The witch tilted her head. "Perhaps. But curses linger, little prince, and love, like magic, must be tested." With a wave of her hand, the flames vanished. A fog rolled in, thick and cold. In the confusion, the princess was separated from the others. She wandered alone, her lantern dim and her heart pounding. Strange whispers echoed through the mist, shadows shifting beyond her vision. Yet she pressed on, calling for the prince, for anyone, her voice growing hoarse. At last, just before despair took hold, she saw a light, a single golden glow. She followed it and found the prince, waiting beside a fallen tree. "You found me," he said, relief in his voice. "I never stopped looking," she whispered. The fog lifted. The witch was gone. Chapter 8. The Frozen Fortress. Beyond the forest lay the northern realm, yet what greeted them was not the kingdom of the prince's youth, but a land cloaked in winter. Ice gripped the towers of the capital city, and the once vibrant banners hung frozen and faded. The usurping duke, one of the prince's distant cousins, had seized the throne in his absence. He ruled with fear, draining the land of warmth and joy. When the people saw the prince ride through the gates, many wept with disbelief and hope. But the duke would not yield so easily. He challenged the prince to prove his identity through a trial of wisdom, courage, and truth. 3 tasks were set: to retrieve the crown of light, hidden deep in the icy caverns beneath the palace, guarded by illusions and frost spirits, to name the 3 lost virtues, forgotten by the realm in its years of shadow, to face his reflection in the hall of mirrors, where truth revealed both strength and shame. The princess stood by his side through each trial. In the caverns, it was her voice that soothed the frost spirits. In the temple of memory, it was her heart that remembered the virtues, kindness, honor, and hope. And in the hall of mirrors, when the prince saw visions of his past arrogance and mistakes, it was her hand that steadied him. When the final task was completed, the duke had no choice but to step down. The people cheered as the prince reclaimed his crown, not with force, but with proof of worth. Chapter 9. The wedding and the ever-after spring returned to the kingdom, melting the snow, coaxing green shoots from the earth, and bringing birdsong back to the trees. a great celebration was declared, inviting nobles and commoners from far and wide. The palace was adorned with lilies and gold ribbons. The bells rang from dawn to dusk, and laughter echoed through every hall. On the day of their wedding, the prince and the princess stood beneath an arch of blooming roses. Vows were spoken, not of perfect fairy tale promises, but of wound honesty, patience, and shared dreams. As they kissed, the witch watched from afar, her expression unreadable, but her presence oddly peaceful. Some said she was never seen again. Others claimed she became a guardian of the forest, testing only those who strayed too far from kindness. Years passed, and the kingdom flourished under their rule. They were remembered not just for magic or royal splendor, but for the gentleness with which they ruled, and the strength of a love that began with a broken promise and a golden ball. And so, in a land once lost to winter, warmth returned, not from spells, but from hearts that had learned the truth of companionship, and they lived happily ever after.